hazard. So this is very likely in a right of way, so you could certainly legitimately expend the money. I mean, it's up to you whether you want to or not. Fencing is sufficient, the signage is correct, so you could keep it that way and it would be safe. But then you've got to keep monitoring that all the time to make sure the signs are still there and the fencing is intact. So it may actually be more inconvenient and in the long term costly to be monitoring that. But I didn't see what the price of repairing it is, but you can certainly authorize a repair.
Estimated cost to repair $1,989.77.
You could certainly authorize that.
Now, if there's we talked about possible bonds out there. Could we get our monies back if there is?
It's very difficult on the bonds. You're going to have to prove that it was within the bond's
Right.
still active, that it's actual failure. I mean, bonds are not as simple as they seem, and they don't often pay for the full amount of the repair. So, yeah, we could get lucky. We should certainly look at the bond. I don't know that there is a bond on that particular one. We should pull it this week and see if we can find it. But that certainly is a first order of business to see if there's still a bond on it. Because even if you get only a little bit, it's better than nothing. Certainly. But you want to contact the bonding company before you do any work, because some of the times the bond requires that they're doing the work.
Okay.
So we certainly want to look at that.
Can we make that a, I know tomorrow's not a good day for you, but can we make it a priority to check with the bonding on this?
Absolutely.
Should we have our sidewalk policy in place before we do anything?
You don't need one before you do something you think is an emergency. Certainly, it would be best before you did them haphazardly, but you would not then very likely be able to get that money back from the property owner later. And in order to assess it for the property owner, you'd need to notify them. Technically, you wouldn't need to offer them the opportunity to fix it. You can have a policy that says you fix it, but generally what jurisdictions do is they say, hey, your sidewalk is problematic, you have so many days to find a contractor or to repair it yourself to these standards, and you wouldn't have time to do that if you did it as an emergency. So generally, if the governmental entity comes in, makes a correction, you would not then at any point go back on the homeowner for that amount. So you would just be assuming that we would either get reimbursed through a bond, or if not, we would just be paying for that particular one. And you can do that. You can even do that and then enact a policy 2 months from now saying this is how we're going to do it henceforth. It's not a problem that you suddenly create your policy.
But is that fair for other people?
It is and it isn't. I mean, you kind of got to decide what you're going to do at some point. Until you're presented with the issue of failing sidewalks, you're not really
Right,
going
this seems to be the first major issue, so.
Yeah. And if it's significant, you don't want to wait a long period of time.
Then you still have a safety issue here. I mean, you can't just ignore it from now till somebody makes up their mind they're going to tell us whether they're going to pay for it or not.
The only question I still have is, how do we know what would happen if the homeowner association owns it? Because we don't even know for sure that they aren't maintaining it. I know it's unlikely, but what if they do?
Well, we can find that. Homeowners' documents are recorded generally, so we can find that out. Does this section have a homeowner association?
Yeah. As far as I know, right? We're talking about the Amelia Park.
Amelia Park. This is Amelia Park.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is their homeowner association active? And
As far as I know.
Yeah, I believe that's who contacted Julie was a member of the homeowners association.
yeah. I'm doubtful they're responsible for
Yeah.
sidewalks.
To that same
Otherwise, they
end,
wouldn't be calling us.
Yeah. Well, they
Well,
would.
everybody's strapped for cash now.
Yeah.
to that same end, for the creation of the policy regarding how to proceed with sidewalks in the future, is that something that begins at the planning commission level, or administrative?
It's really an administrative function. I mean, really, council has to make the determination how they want to do it. I mean,
I guess what I'm asking is, if council were to direct you to provide, a starting place for a policy based on whatever direction they provide tonight, does, I know council has ultimate approval authority on it, but would it go before the planning commission before coming to council?
Probably as to specifications, if you're going to allow the homeowners to do the work themselves, you would probably want some planning commission approval in creating the specifications. Certainly, the engineering company would want to do that. It's not something that I could even remotely figure out. I mean, we could borrow some from other jurisdictions, but again, it's a question as to how you want the sidewalks done. So I would think you would want at least the engineer reviewing and perhaps planning reviewing the specifications on the sidewalks. Ultimately, who pays for them and how that process is done is
Approved
a
by
council determination.
Okay.
And I don't
Anything
think
in zoning about that?
there wouldn't be anything in zoning about, no, not as far as
Whose
sidewalks.
responsibility would be?
No. No, zoning really regulates land uses and placement of things. There might be something in zoning as to the location of sidewalks, but I don't think your zoning code even has that. It's not very standard. So it wouldn't be in the zoning. Ultimately, you really just have to make a call as to how you're going to do it. And what I could do for next meeting is have just a memo of the different ways to do it, and revised code sections that talk about it and how the assessments are done, if that's helpful to council in making that determination.
I think that'd be a good starting point, because it can go either way. I mean,
It can.
Especially looking at the overall view of the village, as much as we've expanded, as much as the sidewalk we've laid, it's going to be a huge expense eventually. And for this village to try to encompass all these sidewalk repairs, we're just not going to have that kind of money. So.
Well, and I think that's generally what's happening with jurisdictions. Most of the jurisdictions that generally repaired and paid for sidewalks and now going to a policy where they don't, because you just simply don't have the dollars to do it. Now, you can, if you don't do the homeowner responsibility and you just do it and assess it, as Todd mentioned, as Pat mentioned, you get a much better bang for your buck because you'll have a policy. This year we're replacing this many linear feet of sidewalk, and they're going to be in these subdivisions, and you bid it out and you get a pretty decent price. You don't want to be doing it this way. That sidewalk would not cost that much if we were having a contractor do a large section of the village. So you're going to have to create a plan, no matter what you do. The question really ends up, are you going to assess it back to homeowners, or are you going to, take that cost on yourself? I can't imagine that we could afford to take that cost on ourselves. Since my recollection is most of our newer subdivisions were required to have sidewalks, were they not?
Yes, they
For
were.
planning regs. So I think that would be, I'm not sure you're going to, even if you wanted to do it, I'm not sure you're ever going to have the resources to pay for that as an entity. So I think your decision may be taken out of your hands just by financial realities. But I can get you a memo on how to do it, what you have to do, the process, try to see what some other jurisdictions are doing. You can try to figure it out.
You do that and find out about this one specific project we're looking at right now.
We'll look at the bond. I don't think there's a bond that's going to cover this. I doubt it's the homeowner, so I think it's going to be our responsibility. If we're truly concerned about this being a safety issue and you want to have it repaired, you could do a motion tonight that says, if I don't find that someone else is financially responsible, you can direct Ricky to fix it. Then we could get moving in the interim, because I think it would probably take 2 or 3 days to figure out if there's a bond and if there's a homeowner association responsibility. If there's not, can it wait till the next meeting to do it, or is it something you want to have ready to go?
What do you think, Rick?
I've been over there at least every other day, and so far there's nobody tampered with the area, so I think it's maintaining integrity. Nobody's getting on it. However, I do think it is a very...
It's an area that's used a lot.
Not that particular sidewalk. That's a dead-end street, and most of that lies upon just 2 houses. And by directly across the street, it's not used a whole lot. My concern is if somebody would remove the fencing and go through there and trip and fall, it would be probably liable for that. Because those areas you see in the picture are quite significant trip hazards. And the same with the sewer lid area. That is really buckled. And without adequate street lighting kind of dim in those areas, if you walk along in the dark, you'll trip on those. So it is a safety concern that we may not want to be liable for.
My only concern is generally, how it's what they call a 2-inch rule. If there's a variation of more than 2 inches, that's generally one of governmental entities responsible for fixing it. And if you're saying this is 6
Some
to 8
of it
inches.
is very, very steep.
Yeah, that concerns me just because they call it the 2-inch rule. Courts apply it. Do they apply it always? No, but generally that's a good measure for whether it's a significant hazard. People are expected to lift their feet up a certain amount, so some variations are natural, but the courts have tried to figure out what is excessive, and 2 inches is what they've said is excessive. So this is more dangerous from a...
It is. I might also add, in the 6 years I've been here, this problem has arisen in several driveways, not in our right-of-ways, but their driveways has collapsed in the same way, so the area seems to be prone to that. So we don't want to prolong or wait a long period of time before we act about getting a policy in place. I've seen the one driveway completely collapsed in the sinkhole, which is at the beginning of Amelia Park, and that's just in the last 6 years. So if the sidewalks are going to be doing the same trend, we want to make sure we address that as possible.
I guess the question is, do we go ahead and fix this one and then come up with a policy? Or do we, I don't foresee us coming up with a policy in one meeting in one night.
No, I don't either.
So
So that was my thought.
My recommendation would be to go ahead and fix this if you find that there's no one liable to pay for this particular instance, and then we move forward with the policy.
Motion?
That would be a motion.
I'll second.
Any other discussion or questions?
I do have one, maybe a little off subject. If we can assess it back to people, can we assess it back to homeowners associations?
Only if it's their property.
Only if it's their property, like in front of a park.
If it's common way, then it's their property, you could, yes. The homeowner associations sometimes own a portion of the subdivision, which is why they're
Okay.
responsible for that. If it's not, if they have no ownership and interest in it, no, you couldn't assess it against them.
Okay.
We have a first and a second. Any other discussion? Roll call, please.
Derek,
Yay.
Todd,
Yay.
Renee, Bob,
Yeah.
Tim,
Yay.
Chuck.
Yay.
All right. So, Rick, you want to pick up where we left off there in your report?
On March 8, 2011, we installed 3 concrete pads. They were in 3 different locations. However, by scheduling these at one time to prepare the area, we were able to pour all 3 from one load and save the multi-delivery charges. The minimum delivery charge of $325 with approximately 3 yards of concrete. If we were to pour each pad at a different time, the cost would have been $975 opposed to the $325. So we saved $650 by scheduling those in the right manner to have those poured. And that's the type of thing we would do with the sidewalks in different locations. We have to pour them and try to schedule those together. So sometimes you'll see one pad develop before the other, but they'll be poured in the same situation at the same time. Work continues on the renovation of the shop. It's winding down. We have very little more to do back there, but we do that according to weather also. If we have bad weather, we can't work on the outside. We finish up inside. And we're also, if you noticed, been fixing the sign out front. It's a Scipio building tonight, but it will say municipal building tomorrow, getting the letters back up. And that's another thing, weather pertaining to the scheduling. One last item, there was a large tree that rooted up and fell across the Methodist Cemetery on March 10th, 2011. We cut the majority of the tree and cleared it away from the headstones. There's no headstones damaged due to the falling tree. The large section of the trunk remains in the cemetery because the ground is too soft, and I cannot get my equipment in there. The biggest thing, we've got the wood stack. We do not want to rut the cemetery by taking equipment in, and it's too large to get into, and not practical to carry piece by piece out of there. So Most of the trees still backed up in the trunk, about